Yes. Can you please take your seats, please, for us to start? Distinguished delegates, energetic delegates, this is on your schedule the last main session of these 2 days, referred to as the concluding debate. And I think you would see what we're trying to do here. There's an element of symmetry. It is titled Global Conversation, Local Implementation. And you remember the theme for the Civil Society Days is global movements and change on the ground. So within those global movements, there has been global conversations going back several years. The panel that we've assembled for this last session is to try to have a conversation across these 2 themes: the big global conversations going on and the action on the ground. What I'll do is introduce the entire panel, and then they would start their statements with their statements, and hopefully we would have time for conversation. I would start by introducing Sir Peter Sutherland, who is the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for International Migration. You would be pleased to know that this very morning, Sir Peter was at the palace here in Stockholm because he was graciously nominated by Ambassador Eva Ackerman-Bogg, and Sir Peter is, as we speak, a commander of the Order of the Polar Star. Let's hear it for him.
Wow.
Sir Peter, the use of swords are totally forbidden for this session. Can I also introduce Riaz Hamidullah? He is the Director General of Economic Affairs within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Bangladesh. He's been very much involved in the open-ended working group on the post-2015 discussions, and was central in organizing the global experts meeting in Dakar 2 weeks ago. We also have Pietro, who is the deputy head of the global program of migration and development within the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, and he has had experience working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Switzerland as well. In a way, the 3 of them, I'm suggesting to them, I hope they take my suggestion, they talk on the global conversations, as it were. We also have with us in the panel faces that you are very familiar with, our moderators on the thematic topics over the past 2 days. We have Cathy Tactaquin, who is the executive director of the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. And you would remember she was the rapporteur for civil society at the UN High-Level Dialogue last year. We also have Efrem Jimenez, who is the president of the Federación Zacatecana. And for those, I had the pleasure of attending the breakout sessions that he moderated. To put it politely, he was very militaristic. We also have William Goyes, who is the regional coordinator of Migrant Forum in Asia, and as you know, was the architect, I think that's a fair description, of our now popular 8 goals, 5 years. And you will remember he started the slogan July last year at High Level Dialogue, and now we are hooked onto it. Yesterday he started this analogy of the mall, and now I'm afraid I think in the next coming years everyone will be talking about the mall. So can I now start by handing over to Sir Peter for you to guide us in terms of the conversations, your experience, and how you see the importance of these global conversations. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say that this year's Global Forum is taking place at a time where in many parts of the world the focus has never been more obvious on the issue of migration as a topic. That has both negative and positive implications. The negative implications are a tone in part of the world, countries of destination, which has never been as negatively focused, that I remember, on migration as it is now. We have forthcoming elections in Europe on the 24th, which, according to opinion polls, are likely to result in very significant votes for parties who represent, to me, an entirely wrong approach to the development of our societies, and who parade a certain xenophobic and often racist background to thinking, which links integration in political terms with migration as a negative issue. And this, I think, is an extremely dangerous thing. And on current polls, between 20 and 30% of the total electorate in Europe may well end up voting for parties which, in the main, are reflective of attitudes which towards migration, whether it be internal European migration or external migration, I think are not constructive in terms of the future of our societies. On the other side, I think that over the years, and I don't want to exaggerate this, I think that the global dialogue that has been developing, largely stimulated by the Global Forum itself in a short period of time, has created some positive effects. Now, I don't want to exaggerate this, because there are legitimate complaints that can be made about how far and how quickly we can go, particularly in the normative area. But on the other hand, there is a remarkably coherent approach for the first time coming from both countries of destination and of origin, and significant constituencies in both that are looking at a positive agenda. For an example, looking at the post-2015 development agenda, we have a growing constituency, evident at the high-level dialogue and elsewhere, of countries who are supporting the view that migration is a positive force for development in both countries of origin and destination, and which can help, I think, to develop a discussion which is a constructive one. I think also that we are having increasing dialogue, notwithstanding the negative political atmosphere that I've told you of in various countries of destination. We're having an increasing engagement by governments in a positive way around migration. And leadership roles are being played now within the format of the of the Global Forum by countries which had initially reservations about the multilateralization, to use the word loosely, of a debate about migration. for an example, the group of countries that is now dealing with the migrants in crisis issue, where we're trying to set out a structure and principles on which we can develop into the future responsibilities of various actors in terms of dealing with crises like the crisis which we are having at the moment in Syria, which has led to 2.5 million migrants. We can have a situation where that leadership has been provided across the spectrum, and the United States, I should say, in particular, is playing an important role in that, as indeed are a number of other countries, including the Philippines, Australia, Bangladesh, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, and so on, joining together as part of a dialogue to move forward. We're also making progress, I think, as I said, in the Millennium Development Goals. And there are a whole range of other issues where, hopefully, this type of dialogue can raise to the top of the agenda issues like remittance costs. I know it becomes almost boring because we keep pointing to the reduction in remittance costs now to an average of whatever, 8% from 15%. But that's an enormous amount of money. Of course, one can argue it should be 1% or even less than 1%, but we're moving that way. And we're now increasingly, and the World Bank is doing great work on this, moving on to the area of recruitment costs, which, as we know from what they've published, you can have up to 30% of the earnings over 3 years of somebody recruited from Bangladesh to work in the Middle East can go towards recruitment costs. Raising all of these issues, which in themselves are discrete issues, but the fact that we're all engaged in this together is helpful. On the other hand, on the normative side, I've been pushing in particular the Domestic Workers Convention, not merely because it's important in itself, but because it's self-evidently important, and one cannot understand how there can be political resistance to it in countries of destination. And we're beginning to make progress. Not great, but we're up to 13 countries now, I think, which have ratified. And this is the beginning of a mind shift, because it's not too long ago where it was impossible to get any buy-in to the normative framework, the adoption of conventions under the normative framework. And I think that this is a good example of where it can work. So I don't want to sort of have a false optimism about this, but I think we're making some significant progress. And the last point I would make, and this I hope doesn't sound like flattery, but to my mind, the nexus between civil society and this dialogue is an essential element. I didn't actually fully understand that when we started at the first high-level dialogue, because I personally believed that we'd never get the Global Forum going unless we focus completely on the interstate element. And I was partially politically, I think, right at the time, because of the fear of hectoring ineffective dialogue between civil society and countries, they were reluctant about it. I think we've moved an enormous way. Now, I think we could move significantly and will move significantly further over time, but we've done it in a cooperative spirit. And for me, civil society is a crucial element to this, because, for an example, coming back to the recruitment cost thing, I had a meeting just before this with the World Bank, and we were talking about how do you actually bring about the change that is necessary. For an example, on the recruitment cost issue, you need pressure in countries of origin and of destination to change laws. We can't do it from this global forum, but we can use the dialogue that we have to create the impetus to make progress on this and a whole range of issues. And that's why this dialogue now, and I'm, as usual, going on too long, but this dialogue is actually very important. And the dialogue of the civil society days and the common space is actually very important. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pietro. Riaz, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Jibril. You said statement, but I'd say reflections.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll try to come to you with perhaps 3 blocks of issues. One is, it says global conversation, but with a comma of local implementation. So that will take me to my 3rd block of things to bring before you. First is the Dhaka meeting, why and how it did come with a very effective collaboration with Switzerland. Sorry.
Sorry, I can't really hear, so it's my fault.
Oh,
probably.
okay, sorry.
Yeah.
The Dhaka meeting and what we had in mind, we were actually looking at how the OWG discussions were shaping up in the SDGs. And let me underline that this is just not discussion. This is a discussion, but actually it's, in essence, negotiations. And when how and why people struggle in that negotiation is because when we look back past 40, 50 years in framing development agenda, in a very complicated way, and where uncertainty and risks and vulnerabilities have come in a profound way, how do we really struggle keeping a country's national perspectives, and how does that get factored in a global scheme of things? So everyone's trying to be mindful of sovereignty, and then how do I sort of posit that into the global scheme? So that's where a lot of tension, conflict, apprehension, worry are coming out. That's one. So that's where from the session of the OWG to the other, things are flowing in a very uncertain manner. And that's the part of the difficulty. So from Dhaka meeting, if you go back, you'd find that there are overarching recommendations, and then there are certain specifics under health, education, so forth. Essential idea was that the way the member states or the entire global community is engaging and trying to define the next architecture, so that these go and try to make space within the unfolding or evolving global architecture of the SDGs. That said, I would say that it's increasingly proving very difficult. Someone said that
Riaz, it wasn't anything you said.
I was wondering that. Okay, the point is that someone said, and this I would really urge you to note, that elbow room is getting less. This is very important for us to appreciate, because when an hour back, when you were all deliberating here, and I was listening to the discussions, at one point of time, maybe 3 months back, and there I'd invite Sir Peter Sutherland your attention, we were really wondering that whether we can have a standalone goal on migration. But quickly we could see that the space is shrinking in so much that that has sort of evaporated. The next is that under these other ones, for example, poverty, education, health, economic growth, employment. Now we found that in 1 month's time, from the 10th OWG to the 11th one, the decent work employment, which we thought would be profound and which would really qualify to have a standalone goal, that has been collapsed with under economic growth. Logically right. But the question is that this collapsing and tightening of space, compacting of the SDGs or focus areas is now really challenging us to see that how and how much will we get the desired ones, how much, in what manner, desired possible manner, we will really get migration-specific elements. So someone said that let's not look at migration-focused targets, let's look at migration-specific targets. That's something for us to take back home as well. And if we do that, that's perhaps that we can secure most and best in a very strategic manner. My next point would be that when we sit in the CSOs, and I really, there are a few around here, including Gregory, would remember that past 3-4 months, we have been struggling that, and I was very categorical once to point out that when we go to the OWG where things are happening, or the happening place as one would say, where are the voice for migration, particularly from CSOs and the major groups? Without prejudice, I would say, very candidly say, that's not there, if not very minimal. We made it very categorical. And I'm also surprised to see that in spite of that, even in the last OWG session, that has not come up. And that's where I really challenge each of you, that please go back and please talk amongst you and see that when we look for, when we talk or urge for rainbow coalition from civil society, why isn't it coming? Is there a bit of gap or coordination or something else? That's something I'd really ask you to challenge your own selves. what is important is that what we feel being there, this time round, in the last OWG, we have seen in the global conversation migration and migration-related elements coming out rather strongly compared to the previous sessions. And that would ask us also to secure that how the next few months leading up to end July and thereafter for the entire next session of the General Assembly, meaning thereby from September to the end 2015, how do we really carry forward, sustain the momentum and intensify the momentum? That is where really we're. Otherwise, if I may be very frank in this space, and I'm sure that someone will challenge me, but the few countries which are really pressing on migration or migration-specific, migration-relevant targets are a little keeping our fingers crossed and worry whether the remaining ones in the current version of the co-chairs would really sustain till the end 2015. I hope I'm clear on that. Let me ask you a few questions. If global conversation is one part and the local implementation is the other part, which is complementary, one complementing the other, then how really do we engage? Can we really go back to our own governments now, and it's now, and ask them, how are you really advancing or trying to push migration at the global space? Can we really, for example, the Secretary General would be here tomorrow, and then can it be brought to him from civil society's perspective in a very strong manner, categorical manner, that Mr. Secretary General, you're here, but whatever it happens, but certainly it is in your report. It is in your report in last September where migration came out rather strongly. And that is something in the next synthesis report which would come in September 2014. Can you really bring that forward? So that is where we perhaps be able to, if I may say, compensate for the lost space for migration in the OWG or intergovernmental space than through the Secretary General. That would perhaps allow us to really give it a further push. At the same time, one of the reasons that if one follows the nuances and in between the lines of the co-chairs and the entire deliberation of the OWG, it's very clear that the countries which are rather keen to see migration coming up, that should really come out in the civil society, in the media. In the larger public space, CSO is one, that somehow is still not there. Had it been there, it would have allowed the co-chairs and the member states which are really pushing to really see, look, for example, climate change. And I really urge you to also appreciate that this is not only migration-specific global agenda. This is a space where we are trying to posit migration as much as climate change and others, which are also equally important for X country, Y country, and also for certain region like Africa, for Latin America. And that's where relative judgment is coming. It's not absolute, it's relative. I think I'll stop here, and maybe some of the things we can carry forward in the subsequent days as well.
Okay.
Maybe that will provoke some discussion. Thank you.
It will indeed. Thank you very much, Reyes. Pietro, from the Swiss government point of view, and GFMD particularly, the Swiss are very active in supporting all of these discussions, but you're also very active supporting financially civil society organizations doing practical work on the ground. So perhaps your reflections can bring this bridge between global conversations and action on the ground.
Thank you very much, Jibril, and thank you to all of you. For giving me the possibility to be on this distinguished panel and participate in this conversation on such an important topic. Indeed, I've got a bit of a reputation back at the Global Program of being the one who's pestering everybody about the importance of bringing the global dialogue to the field and also nurturing the global dialogue with our experiences from the field. So I feel very much at home with the topic of today's conversation. I would also like just to maybe structure my short intervention in 2 or 3 elements, and starting also with highlighting what Sir Peter already mentioned about the path that we have already undertaken in the last few years. If I look back, and I did so recently maybe some of you may know that the International Agenda for Migration Management, which came out of the Bern Initiative, which was launched in 2001, and then resulted in 2004 in this Agenda for Migration Management. If you look at the vocabulary in that document, and if we look talking about all aspects of migration, and you compare this vocabulary with the substance and depth that we have now, you see already in a very prism way the way and the progress that we have achieved in the last few years. But we are far from having reached the goal. And here again, going back maybe to the experience of the Global Program Migration Development, which is since 2008 one of the various global programs that we have at the Swiss Development Agency. If we look, for example, there's a global program on water initiatives. They can reach back on decades of experience on development work on water issues. They have their vocabulary, they have their partnerships, they have their agendas, and that's why for them it was very easy to come up with a global goal on water. And that's why we still struggle, because we don't have yet this depth of experience and concrete knowledge that compared to other more classic, in inverted commas, elements of development cooperation. But we are getting there, and I think the global conversation linked to local implementation has contributed enormously in the last few years of gathering this information and gathering the narrative of bringing forward a very strong message that migration should be included in the post-2015 agenda. But also, and this highlights a little bit, or just to give you some reflections on why Switzerland has been so active in putting forward migration as one of the elements that we would like to see in the post-2015 agenda. I mean, for us it becomes clear that migration is first and foremost about human beings, about the human rights. And this touches, and we are talking about here, yes, 235 million people, this is the number that we all know. But there are many more million of people behind it. There are families, family members. So when we talk about migration development, we're talking about basically the global community, because migration impacts us all. So if we address migration in the post-2015 agenda, then we are talking about addressing the needs and desires of many people around the globe. Migration also has shadows and problems. We talk about brain drain, we talk about human trafficking, we talk about brain waste. So these are also issues that we need to take on. And by anchoring migration in the global sustainable development agenda, this will give us also additional instruments to be active, to be heard, as governments, as civil society organizations, as international organizations, unions, private sectors, and so on, to say this has been recognized of something that we have to deal with. And now maybe trying to make the bridge to the next part of this conversation. So a few reflections from my side on what the causality is between global dialogue and local implementation. The causality is always difficult to show. How does the dialogue in New York or in Geneva or here in Stockholm impact the life of the migrant in Senegal? This is something that we struggle also as a global program at the Swiss Development Agency when we have to put forward our credit proposals to the steering board. Say, but they put the finger on it. They say, but how does it impact the life of the migrants? And how do you intend, by traveling to Stockholm, to make the life of domestic migrant workers better, for example? So let me just try to give you some ideas, and I hope maybe they can be picked up later. What certainly came out for me of the global dialogue is a very strong and growing partnership between all different stakeholders. And these partnerships have led to knowledge, have led to practical experience, have led to sharing of experiences and stronger cooperations, because as governments, we can't address the multifaceted nature of migration. We need civil society, we need the private sector, we need unions and other partners. It has triggered institutional changes. And again, I'm sorry to be repeating myself, but the Global Program of Migration Development at the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency is, to a large extent, a result of the Swiss engagement in the global dialogue on migration development. Because we thought also from a policy coherence point of view, we have to have a strong, capable tool to not only talk migration development, but also implement migration development. So that's then when the decision was taken to have the Global Program Migration Development. And the last point is also policies. We see policies adapt, change, shift, very much driven by the global dialogue. And I think this is also something where we can further discuss with all of you. But, and this is really my last point, the worst thing that we can do is to go home after excellent days spent in Stockholm thanks to the organizers here, and to tap ourselves on the back and say, well, it looks good. Once more, we discuss migration development. We all agree that it is important to have in the agenda, and it will be so. I think the path is very long. We live in a reality where not only there are divergent interests fighting in New York and elsewhere of being in the agenda, but there's also reality out there, and I think Sir Peter alluded to it, where migration is not accepted as a positive force for development, where migration is still perceived as a threat to social cohesion and national identity, or where migrants are seen as those taking the jobs of citizens. So we also have to work on the perception issues. Now, this may not be enough time to change the perception of our societies to influence our government's position for the post-2015 agenda, but nonetheless, there is a tomorrow and after the post-2015 agenda, so I think this is also one of the messages I would like to put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pietro. And Kathy, to put it, to misquote Monty Python, I'd put it, what has GFMD ever done for us from a protection point of view?
I've been asking myself that question, too. Well, it is. Honestly, this is a question that we ask ourselves every year. And we've asked, I think, as civil society, we've asked ourselves every year since 2007, the experience in Brussels. And throughout the civil society days, what are we doing here? Are we having impact? I think over the years, we've certainly expanded our access to the process. There's been valuable networking and conversations. I feel that our own ideas have matured, and I think we did feel that we were beginning to affect the overall agenda. I feel there were, from the beginning, questions of human rights as necessary to any conversation on the question of migration and development. We questioned the role of remittances as a singular driver for development vis-a-vis migration. I feel we've made some progress. It hasn't been solid. Neither has, I think, some of that conversation necessarily trickled down and had impact. On the other hand, I feel that at local levels, certainly in the United States where I work, but in conversation with groups around the world on what they are doing, that over the last 7-8 years since we've had the Global Forum on Migration and Development, we are actually beginning to make progress in addressing questions of development and looking at root causes of migration. You know, coming out of the 2 workshops over the last couple of days, the 2 sessions on migrants in crisis and on children, on the one hand, we were trying to address, you know, what we see as crisis situations, and I think we have a lot of ideas, and I think we feel that we can make progress. Some of the, you know, as tragic as the questions of children in migration, in the migration process, as tragic as those questions are, it's probably an area where we stand to make some gains if we can organize ourselves well. We are beginning to see a culture shift, which I think has to precede our ability to convince governments to act with political will and with international agencies as well to really move on that. Nonetheless, in the course of those conversations, what continued to surface has been our frustration on questions of development, on the issues of the lack of social protections, restrictions on immigration, lack of visas, lack of decent opportunities, an intersection of both migration policies and development that continues to frustrate and give rise to the crisis conditions. So regardless of what we might be able to achieve on some of the advocacy points, and that includes work that we're doing at local levels, at national levels, and we're beginning to do at the international level, without really beginning to address the development question. And it's the post-2015 development agenda, I think, has really opened up that conversation for us as advocates globally in a way that we had not been considering this over the last 7 years. So that's been the good thing about even putting this on the table. We've had to do some very quick study. How do we understand development? There's actually a community of organizations and groups around the world who have a lot of thinking on this, and we've had to actually look at, beyond ourselves, at other theories, at other proposals, at other critiques, and try to embody that. So as organizations that have mainly been focused largely on questions of migration and trying to enter the conversation on development, I feel it's been only fairly recently, and because of the pressure of the 2015 agenda, it's really put it on our table. But I have to say I'm much more pessimistic than Peter. We know that we have to make progress on the development question. We can do what we can to alleviate some of the pressures that we feel in the migration world. But when we're looking at questions of migration, of migrants in crisis, questions of children, we know that unless we're moving the need for social protections as central to any development agenda, and that's in countries of origin as well as in receiving countries, we're not doing ourselves any favor. We're not doing, migrants any favor. So this is how we will have to continue to weigh in on that agenda.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Ephraim, in a way, Kathy's point sort of highlights the necessity of not depending on one framework, one vehicle. So I would say from the point of view of diaspora and development, what are your reflections? You've been in this process from the beginning.
Absolutely right, Jibril. It is for me a pleasure to be sharing these thoughts with this wonderful panel, of course, with all people coming from everywhere around the world. Honestly saying, I am a migrant myself. I've been fortunate enough to be since the first forum in Brussels, and I have seen some progress myself. At the very beginning, we sat at the table like very strangers. We began debating. Eventually, this translated into dialogue. Dialogue translated into understanding of each other, and this understanding ended up into real new forms of collaboration. This collaboration led us to realize that we all nations need to be partners in development. We only have one house, and that house is called planet Earth. We need to make sure that we see each other as only one race. At the end, it's in our best interest to respect each other. Of course, I have a feeling like you all here present are my extended family. And I feel that regardless of where we are coming from, what language we speak, what color is our skin, we all want our governments to acknowledge that that migrants' communities are made out of citizens. Citizens often called diaspora, but we are citizens committed to development, very well committed to development, because development is not only in the country of origin, it's in country of origin and destiny as well. And we have proven that we are agents of change. We have clear that we are, at this point, we are responsible, not only government, we need to share responsibility. And we need to share responsibility to accomplish this. Government themselves, they cannot achieve or work unilaterally into this task. We need both to join forces. Of course, migrant women, migrant young, migrant ethnic groups, and of course all civil society need to sit in a table with governments, and we all together need to design and elaborate public policy all together. Of course, I would say that in order for us to do that, we need political will, not only from government, but from civil society as well. Where there is political will, there is a practical way to do things. So what I'm saying here is that we need to really work together. That doesn't mean I don't have some concerns. One of them is that, for example, I've seen many governments around the world that still see remittances as the silver bullet, as if is this the answer to development? And my point of view, that is not. Government should not be proud of seeing the remittances in their country going up, because that only shows that they have been unable to provide good jobs and, of course, a good environment for people to stay. So here, what I'm trying to propose, just to finish and to wrap up, there is a need to continue this kind of dialogue with these forums. And of course, we need to create and design instruments to do a follow-up into this. And of course, we need the collaboration of government to strengthen the regional forums. We need to continue to have more of that. And of course, to call governments to collaborate with civil society to create national and local spaces to dialogue and to see as of how we can improve, so how can we be better. And of course, just to finish, I would say that we need to call out the United Nations to make sure that civil society is integrated into this agenda post-2015. We need some leaders sitting at the table where you are elaborating and designing this agenda that at the end we need to create a win-win situation for every human race, independently of where they are coming from. Those are my thoughts for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. William, you've listened to all of the comments, and we've noticed that there's talk of some convergence despite some of the pessimism. Are you a believer of the emergence of an enlightened period? Are we towards an enlightened period where government and civil society would sit in peace and agree brilliant policies?
Okay. Let me start by saying, I don't know if you remember, in 2006, Peter, myself, and I think John, we were together in that room in New York, just before the high-level dialogue started. And Peter was meeting the task force that was representing civil society. And you said at that stage that it's very delicate. It's very delicate. Governments don't want to listen to civil society. They don't want us in the room, kind of thing. And that's why this thing needs to be treaded softly. Go gentle with this. From 2006 to 2014, some of us have been there every year. And now Peter should see the number of people who have been here for at least from 2006 to 2014. 7 and 14, no? For at least 5 years, keep coming, right? We've been coming, and in the dialogues, you must admit as well, and I'm sure governments will admit, those host countries which were afraid that civil society is going to blow up things or whatever, and got high-level security in place and all that, the dialogue has been constructive. Nobody can say that the dialogue has not been constructive. It's time now for the dialogue to be transformative. It can't wait anymore. We have to. There is an urgency about it. And the representative from the Open Working Group has said he's not heard the voice of civil society on migration, and that migration should be out there. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is because we have not had enough time to talk to each other. We are still talking with civil society days and government days. If at the high-level dialogue last year, if we had looked at talking more with each other, governments and civil society, because we have constructive dialogue, if we had more chance to talk to each other, probably we would have had a better plan going in to the Open Working Group on what we want to say in relation to migration and the post-2015 agenda. So if it's anyone to blame that it is not happened, it is ourselves, governments, more particularly, of course, and, and civil society, because we have not had that chance to talk to really each other. We are talking in our different rooms. And that should have changed, and that would have created an urgency. That would have changed perspectives, what you are saying. Minds, how do you change perspective? We could have changed that. Because the art of changing perspective, civil society is very skillful at. So we could have, if we had spent more time on this. And I think this is something, because it got me thinking, because you raised that question, do we have a plan B? Our plan B was this, that we would be talking more to governments. And this is something that we really need to look at. So maybe tomorrow we have a chance in the common space kind of thing, and this might be something that for us, those of us who are in civil society, we might want to think of how we make a bigger appeal, and of course, ultimately then going back down to the national level. And it is right, I think we can't, if we are going to make any success at this, we have to take it back down to the national level. Because some of us are now coming after so many years, we are talking about old age sicknesses already. And maybe we need to change that, and we might want to talk to the Turks and things like that, and even to the Swedes to see how this can actually change, where we talk more to each other, kind of thing. The other point I think that is very important for us to look at is, and thank you for supporting the Domestic Worker Convention. I think I know that in the high-level dialogue also you have raised that, and you've raised it here, and I know that you have been writing about it as well. The ILO is now going to look at in the June session of the International Labour Conference. There is a protocol on forced labor that the ILO is hoping would get ratified. That protocol reflects a lot of what is happening in migration and in domestic workers and what's happening for domestic workers. The trade unions, I think, have a sign-up kind of letter to all the governments. It would be great if you could rally governments tomorrow and over the next 2 days to say, look, this is exactly what it is about. This is exactly what it reflects, really, the situations of what migrants are experiencing on the ground, and it might be good if we champion this as well, and if you champion this protocol as well, because it is reflective of migrant workers' experiences. Yeah, so I think, yeah, there is progress, but we have lost time, and we have lost time because of ourselves, and if we're going to gain time, we've got to find we've got to find more time to talk to each other, and to be able to push that agenda together. Because together as governments and civil society, understanding each other's perspective, differences and things like that, could make a reasonable call for migration to be on the post-2015 agenda, which the Open Working Group can possibly pick up.
Thank you very much, William. Now, I think we do have 10 minutes or so for further discussions. I would propose to take 3 to 5 comments or questions, and at most you would get 1 minute, and then we would come back to the panel just for final statements and reflection. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where's the 5th one? Someone who's not spoken before. 5 there. Yes. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 5th one.
Muchas gracias.
Sorry, one moment to get the interpretation.
Muchas gracias. Ana Lorena Delgadillo, de la Fundación para la Justicia en México y Colectivo para las Américas. ¿Otra vez? Ah, perdón.
Okay, thanks.
Gracias.
Oh, one more. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. You can start.
Hola. Muchas gracias, Ana Lorena Delgadillo, de la Fundación para la Justicia de México y Colectivo para las Américas. Es un mensaje para el señor Peter Sutherland. Consideramos que la situación de violaciones a derechos humanos que enfrentan las personas migrantes en países de origen, tránsito, destino y retorno requiere una visión multidisciplinaria para que sean atendidas. En este sentido, creemos necesario que los diferentes relatores, comités, grupos de trabajo de Naciones Unidas observen, documenten y recomienden a los países que visitan las mejores prácticas y prácticas específicas para poder atender estas violaciones. En este sentido, que cuando un relator vaya a un país, observe también a la población migrante, sin importar si es o no el relator para migrantes de Naciones Unidas. Requerimos entonces que mecanismos o relatores o grupos de trabajo de niñez, mujeres, población indígena, desarrollo, ejecuciones extrajudiciales, desapariciones forzadas o independencias de jueces y abogados y todos los demás se vean involucrados en la problemática de violaciones a derechos humanos que implica a la población migrante. Esto nos puede dar la oportunidad de juntos, sociedad civil y los organismos de Naciones Unidas, hacer efectiva la portabilidad de los derechos humanos de esta población. Se requiere entonces esta visión multidisciplinaria de protección a los derechos que se tiene que ver reflejada en varias agendas, entre ellas la Agenda de 2015, pero también en los procesos particulares y locales de interacción de los diferentes organismos o órganos de Naciones Unidas para cada país. Gracias.
Thank you. Merci. Abbé Ambroise du réseau Caritas Internationalis, Caritas Sénégal. Je remercie les panélistes de la pertinence vraiment de leurs propos. Et je saisis l'occasion pour rebondir sur ce qu'a dit le représentant du secrétaire général des Nations Unies. Aujourd'hui dans le monde, il y a des idéologies xénophobes qui se développent et qui constituent une grande menace pour l'humanité. Ces idéologies ont des groupes porteurs que sont des partis politiques, dont la figure de proue aujourd'hui, c'est Marine Le Pen en France. La société civile ici présente, qui croit que l'humanité est une, qui croit à ce qu'a dit le panéliste qui est ici à l'extrême gauche, que nous sommes tous des frères et sœurs. Cette société civile ici présente doit se constituer en groupe porteur pour qu'à travers le monde, nous disions non à ces idéologies-là qui, hier, ont permis de coloniser l'Afrique, en présentant des êtres humains comme des animaux dans des zoos à travers l'Europe. C'est sérieux, c'est des idéologies qui développent des comportements anachroniques. Je voudrais rêver avec vous, chers amis de la société civile, et demander aux représentants de M. Ban Ki-moon de prendre un jour tous les États qui font partie des Nations Unies, de les prendre tous et de leur faire un exercice qui va nous permettre de faire un progrès, non pas de développement, mais un progrès humain. Qu'un jour, Ban Ki-moon prenne un panier aux Nations Unies et inscrire sur un papier « Je crois à la dignité de l'homme. Je crois que chaque être humain, chaque individu est un être humain. Tous les États qui le croient n'ont qu'à se lever et mettre le papier dans le panier. » Cet exercice, je voudrais vraiment suggérer qu'il soit fait aux Nations Unies. Parce que tout ce que nous déplorons là aujourd'hui, dans le cadre de la migration, eh bien, découle tout simplement du fait que nous ne croyons pas assez que les individus qui se meuvent à travers le monde sont des êtres humains. Je vous remercie.
This is for Riaz. I'm just waiting for him to finish. Riaz, this is for you. Half a comment and half a question. Actually, the comment refers to something William already alluded to, but yeah, we've been joking around, but I think quite seriously, we have about 17 or 18 hours of work put into migration and post-2015 development agenda just this week alone, and hundreds of hours beyond that. And we have some things that we are definitely been working on for a long time. So as William said, we have tomorrow, but we also have today to talk more about this, and we really look forward, especially in bringing what we've already done and seeing how that can synthesize with the Dhaka principles especially, and how we can support your work in the OWG in pushing forward the principles that we think are really important. So that's the half comment. On the half question is actually more specifically somewhat of a technical but sort of tactical question as well. On the latest OWG, I think you had indicated there's already some indication under maybe focus area 15 where some of the points on migration and mobility are starting to kind of group. And perhaps in the next OWG, there will be a clustering. Do you see this clustering as a possibility to actually advance a standalone goal, or maybe to really, really highlight and pull out perhaps some of the key points coming out from the Dhaka recommendation? So more of a tactical question, where do we go with this?
Can we take those two and another three? Anyone from this side? Oh, no. One there and second one here. Yeah? Yes, it is. Okay, so the two, and then we've got one there, second here, and someone who's not spoken before. I'm looking, the lady out there, haven't spoken before. Okay, the microphone can go.
Okay. My name is Behshid Najafi. I'm working for an organization, Information and Counseling Center for Female Migrants and Refugees in Germany. I am myself a migrant, and I'm working there for more than 20 years. We support more than 600 migrant women and refugees in a year in our counseling center, and they are focusing different problems: abuse, rapes, and exploitation, racism, all of these things. I have, for several times, I have discovered the human rights conventions, and they are all my utopian. All the conventions, so we have an anti-racism convention, we have women convention, we have child convention, we have a lot of these conventions, and most of the countries of the world, they have signed, they have ratified. But I ask me all the time, why they don't implement them? Why? Why just they signed, they ratified? Why? Why they are doing? Is it for their image, or it is just that they believe on them? So I ask you, as a person who are responsible for this field, we can do these countries accountable for what they have signed for these words, and to improve the situation of migrant women all over the world, and even in the Europe. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just take the other two, then I'll come back. Okay. I'll take the rest of the question. Can the mic just go around? Yes, please.
Thank you. My question is in relation to diaspora. We know the post-2015 goals are focused mainly on knowledge and technology. And we feel that if existing knowledge globally, which is also among professionals in the diaspora can be effectively harnessed both in the developing as well as developed countries, the possibility of achieving the post-millennium development goals, 2015 development goals, is much, much higher, because we know that there are many, many knowledgeable and experienced professionals outside their countries of origin that could support many of the developing countries in building their institutional capacities for sustainable development. So the advocacy that we can make and reinforce is for knowledge exchange, technology transfer for sustainable institutional capacity building by harnessing the knowledge and experience of professionals in the diaspora, partnering with professionals and institutions in the developing country for the common goal of human development. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next one.
Raúl Delgado Weiss, of the International Network on Migration and Development, also Colectivo Migraciones para las Américas. Well, I've been participating in all the global forums on migration and development, and I agree with all my companions and colleagues here that we have done a lot of progress in this process. And I think what I heard so far is that partnership with civil society is important to go further and to move further in the achievements of the Global Forum on Migration and Development. But the question that we always raise in this process is how to incorporate. If we are partners of the process, we are not institutional partners. So how can we advance to be institutional partners in this process? I think this is something very important, and we have been demanding this for several years, and I hope that we can advance in this process.
Okay.
Not process, I hope it could be achieved soon.
Okay, thank you. There's two more, one here and the last one is here. And then what I suggest is, Sir Peter, you respond, and Pietro, you can pick the points you want to comment, Riaz, then Ephraim, William, and we finish with Cathy, yeah? Okay, one there and the last one is here. So. No, it wasn't for Madam Jai, it was, yeah. At the back, you can see it.
At the back. At the back.
Thank you.
I am Lizzie from India, representing MMFA. I feel that we had been coming together years after years, government as well as civil society. And what is missing is the voices of the voiceless, the real migrants. And that I feel that could be one reason why the government does not relent. And that could be also why the reason there is not sufficient force. So I feel that I kindly request the UN Special Representative to make provision for these such occasions, to make the real voices of the migrants who is at the low-skilled, semi-skilled, who are real suffering victims, to be heard in such august gathering that can transform our meetings and recommendations and outcomes. Thank you.
Okay. Madame Sako, last.
Oui, merci. Moi, je voulais intervenir, je vais me représenter Madame Hadissa Khogna, présidente du Forum des organisations de solidarité internationale issues des migrations en France. Sur 3 petits points, rapidement. Sur la cohérence des politiques et surtout sur, comment dire, la coordination qu'il faut entre les différents organismes au niveau du système onusien sur ces politiques notamment sur le post-2015, parce que je sais que le dialogue de haut niveau, le communiqué sur les migrations était beaucoup plus avancé, ce qu'on a eu après sur tous les autres forums précédents. Après, il y avait les États du Sud. Je sais que le processus du GFMD, au début, n'avait pas inclus du tout les responsables politiques des États plutôt du Sud. Petit à petit, je pense qu'ils ont été intégrés au système. Mais jusqu'à présent, je pense qu'ils ne sont pas assez présents pour s'imprégner des recommandations. Parce que quand on parle de partenariat, ces partenariats devraient être les États du Nord et les États du Sud. Et leur présence est toujours très timide dans ces rencontres. Le troisième point, c'est plus une contribution, c'est surtout sur les filles du Nigeria. On a vu les lycéennes qui ont été kidnappées avec toutes les violences qu'il faut et les pétitions. Je pense que sur ce forum, au moins, il devrait y avoir aussi une déclaration très forte pour dénoncer ce genre d'action et puis avoir au moins une action de la société civile ici présente en termes de déclaration. Je vous remercie.
Very much. I'll come back to the panel. Sir Peter.
Well, first of all, let me thank those who've contributed. We've had an extraordinarily rich number of contributions on different subjects. I'm going to start by making one fundamental point, which I think is implicit in many of the replies. If we didn't have a global forum, how would the world be different for this dialogue? It'd be totally different, because there would be no global dialogue. And what has been brought about, whatever its deficiencies, has changed, in my view, the whole scenario to the one that existed at the first high-level dialogue. And I think that that's implicit and explicit in many of the things that have been said. We're here talking, and we're here talking in a way which does not answer all of the objections that have been raised, particularly the issue of dialogue between government and civil society, which has been a slow accretion of movement towards a better dialogue. But those who were here at the beginning know that this whole process that has done so much, that nearly 90% of countries around the world has informed and changed their policies according to our assessment, which has been objectively carried out and anonymously carried out. At the beginning, the biggest objection was precisely to the issue of dialogue, or one of the two biggest issues, was dialogue with civil society. The voices of government were saying, what we need to do, we represent the people, we're democratically, in the main, not everywhere, we are democratically elected, we represent the people, we should talk to each other. We shouldn't be talking to NGOs. They're not democratically elected by the people, they're elected by some people and they represent some interests, but we should talk to each other. That's how it started. And we've traveled a long way. Now, not as far as I would like. Second point, the obligations of civil society, I think, are enormous. Let me give you one example. 2 opinion poll surveys that are reliable in countries of destination have recently established that in the United Kingdom, the average person in the United Kingdom believes that 30% of the total population of the United Kingdom are migrants. This is lunacy. It is completely and utterly wrong. In the United States, another survey suggests that the same question is answered as to 42%. Now, this goes to the question about information. NGOs, combined with the information flow that should be coming from the combined UN agencies, should be putting out there facts which avoid the sort of conclusions which have obviously been drawn in societies around Europe as to the threat, as they see it, of migration. They're living in a world that is unreal. and that is provoked by extremist political parties who express views which are ridiculous, as we saw in a recent debate about what would be the effect of Bulgarian and Romanian travel in Europe. They couldn't find Bulgarians or Romanians to interview them instead of the millions that were meant to be coming across the border the day that the border fell. This is crucially important, therefore, that the civil society have to be a vehicle with us, the UN system, in putting factual information that is actually correct before the people, whether it be on the demographic challenges that, in fact, should lead to the conclusion that migration is not merely desirable, it's absolutely necessary in many developed countries, through the arguments about integration, where countries with a good record in integration, as Sweden has, and as Sweden has, incidentally, in providing information about how many migrants there are in Swedish society, the smallest gap between reality and what has actually happened on the surveys that I've talked about is here. And that's why we have a more constructive engagement here. But what am I saying? I'm saying that civil society has to play a crucial role in informing at national level and changing policies at national level, because much though we may desire that the global forum acts as a catalyst to global change, the reality is that this will have to take place on the ground. And there's so much we can do in the limited amount of time and effort that we can put in to deal with this, and no more. With regard to the question about why don't the people who ratify, the many people who've ratified and signed conventions, why don't they actually give body to those conventions? Well, first of all, there isn't a huge body of people who have signed the conventions, and there's an even smaller group that have ratified them. In some instances, nobody from the developed countries are ratifying conventions. So we shouldn't assume that there's a huge body of legal instruments that have been legally accepted by countries which are not being applied. The reality is that they're not being ratified in the number that should, and one might hope, should be the case. Remittances, perhaps one can argue that remittances have become an exclusive focus, and they should not be an exclusive focus, but also we should recognize that they are a big issue when we come to the development goals, post-2015 development goals. They're anticipated that the total amount will be about $500 billion per year by 2016. $500 billion. Now that makes up triple the total amount of overseas development aid. And as to the argument that migration is in some way an acceptance of the failure of development, I can understand the logic behind that, because in a sense many people might not want to migrate but for the fact that opportunities are not available for them at home, and therefore you can't say that migration is a substitute for development. Anything but. Of course that is untrue. But on the other hand, you cannot argue from that migration is negative to development. The evidence clearly proves that it's extremely positive to develop, not just merely in remittances, but in a whole range of other connections that develop out of migration. And fundamentally, we're also talking about the basic right of individuals to travel and to be somewhere other than where they are born, which to my mind goes right back to what was referred to in terms of what the UN stands for. And what I believe Ban Ki-moon, who has consistently said to me that this is an important priority for him, which he's demonstrating in the middle of a major crisis in the Ukraine by being here, as he will be, tomorrow. There isn't a failure to recognize migration as a big issue. And there isn't a failure by those in particular who've taken on the burden, most dramatically demonstrated by Sweden, in terms of bringing us together here, together to talk about it. The Charter of the UN is the fundamental basis for what this is about. And that goes to the dignity of man and the equality of man as core principles. I should say man and woman. I mean man in the broadest sense before I'm attacked. But this is the core of what the UN is about, and I think that that's recognized particularly by Ban Ki-moon. I think it's an absolute key. My last point: two people have made a point about interinstitutional cooperation within the UN. Now, I have been known to rant and rave publicly about this subject. I'm sure I've annoyed a number of the institutions of the UN no end, because at every stage there have been good ones and less good ones in this. But I think we've moved a significant way. And I'm including, and the positive, let me say, IOM have played an enormously important role in all of this, in a constructive way, in many of the issues that we're talking about, including the Crisis Migrants Initiative and the post-2015 initiative, and also the World Bank, UNHCR, ILO, who's now currently chairing this. There are lots of people chairing the GMG, which is the organization which we've tried to structure to create the communication dialogue and bring the institutions together, functioning together in the most positive and constructive way. So we're working on that. It is difficult because institutions often view the world through their own prism. They don't see the collective. They see what we are doing and what we should get credit for and what we need money for. And we don't want to be contaminated by all the others who are also looking for money from their constituents. So there is a difficulty here. But I think the leadership of the institutions today is really trying to bring this together in a more constructive way. I'm sure I could go on forever, and I've missed numerous points, but in any event, finally I'll conclude by saying the voices of the migrants, I agree, but in a way, the coordination of the voices of the migrants and the expression of the concern of the migrants is your responsibility. And your claim as a dialogue, part of this dialogue, is that you represent those who are not reflected in government. And we can't have a discourse which is so disorganized as not to rely on constituents. And we have relied, and particularly on those who've coordinated the NGO community, on the NGO community to be the voice of the migrants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pietro, on some of the points you want to pick up.
Thank you very much, Jibril, and thank you to all of you for having raised many important questions. I will really just pick a few. It's impossible to answer them all and to get more in-depth discussions on all the important points that you've raised. But again, not to copying Sir Peter, but one general issue that I would like to raise to begin with is really also the symbol of convergence that we've witnessed in the last few years. And I think the best image of this convergence that's happened was really at the high-level dialogue in October, when we saw, for the first time ever, a UN declaration adopted unanimously by member states on migration development, converging in many aspects with the 5-year, 8-point plan, get the numbers right, and also with the report by the Secretary General. So there we see that we have started a common narrative. But at the same time, convergence or homogeneity also has to have its limits, because civil society has a specific role of poking governments regularly in the side of saying, this doesn't work, this has to be done differently. We have to aim on certain issues on the same narrative, but we have to accept that we have different roles. And from that, I also take the point that there is a limit to convergence, there's a limit to homogeneity that we should aspire. William made a very good point about the lack of possibilities of dialogue between governments and civil society organizations. And you know that Switzerland has been quite from the beginning in favor of opening more doors to the civil society, to the GFMD, but also to other venues of dialogue. But I would like to add a different layer to this discussion. As I mentioned before, I very much like the title. It's about global conversation, local implementation. But there are different layers of conversation. Now, of course, being here at the GFMD, we're talking about the global conversation. But there are conversations at regional level and there are conversations at national levels. And the doors should not only be opened for a dialogue between governments and civil societies at the global level, but they have to be very much open also at the regional and in particular at the national level. So this is the experience that we have done now for the past few years, where we've organized regular briefings with the Swiss civil society to exchange before the high-level dialogue or a few weeks back before the GFMD. So I think this is also part of the dialogue, of the exchange that has to happen between governments, civil society, and other partners involved in this dialogue. Now, it was interesting because we had the great pleasure of having François Crépeau with us at the last briefing that we had a couple of weeks back. And after the briefing, he came to me and told me, and I hope I'm not overstepping here by mentioning this, you Swiss government, you're really quite lucky. Because all the Swiss civil society here, they're all so peaceful. He has experienced different elements of conversation between civil society and governments. Now, I'm not inciting the civil society to start a civil unrest in Switzerland about migration issues. But this is part of the dialogue that we've established, and I think this is also part of the trust that we established between the government and the civil society. But there is much more to do. The remittances, I think this is a very important issue. Of course, it has been glorified as being the silver bullet. And I think there is a huge development potential in remittances. A lot of attention has been given on the reduction of the transfer costs, but I think much more development potential lies in the efficient use of remittances. And let me stress very clearly here, these are private money and the governments don't have anything to say on how these remittances are being used. But governments can favor policy frameworks or opening up the options for migrants, their families, on how to use more efficiently the remittances. And I think this is where a lot of potential lies. It lies in the question of financial inclusion through remittances. I think this is where we have to put more attention on. But migration and migration development is really not only about remittances, but it goes way beyond. The notion of knowledge transfer was mentioned, but it's about transfer of technologies. It's about tying social networks. It's about commerce. It's about trade. It's about having human relations between different continents and different countries that establish ties between these, the people and the governments. So I think reducing the notion of migration development might be politically, unfortunately, sometimes the only viable way to bring the message through, but we have to work on expanding the notion of what is migration development, which is way beyond putting a number of how much money is being transferred yearly from the north to the south, or from the south to south, etc. And really the last point on knowledge, I think a lot of work is being done on creating more knowledge on migration development. There is an initiative, a multi-stakeholder initiative managed by the by the World Bank, NOMAD with the K. It's a global knowledge platform on migration development. And I think there, a lot of people from international organizations, from civil society, from academia, have started working on 12 specific subjects and 4 transversal issues on creating a global knowledge platform on migration development. I think this is also a way to go, a way also where the civil society can go and take on and contribute to this knowledge sharing and knowledge generating so that we can further develop and deepen our narrative on migration development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pietro. Riaz, there were some questions specifically directed to you, I think.
Yeah. As I said, we met in Dhaka just 2 weeks back, and I'll request you to visualize. When we were meeting, by that time we realized that the demand or asking for a standalone goal on migration is perhaps over. And as a result, when we looked at the entire scheme of the co-chair's working document, the approach was that how within the existing scheme can we try to be migration smart and fuse in the elements which would fly most or best. And having that in mind, we looked at the entire scheme of 19 focus areas and looked at that. In the week following, which is last week, where we closed in Dhaka and we went to the New York meeting, we realized that there are 5 or 6 areas, focus areas, where we can have the best possible, the best of possibilities to secure migration. Focus areas on poverty, health, economic growth, and a few others. By the close of the week, and this I'm really asking to visualize it. By close of the week, when we looked at all the sectoral goals, came the goal number, the focus area 15th, which is cross-cutting, which is means of implementation and global partnership for development. That said, it will be very important to note there is a huge debate going on whether means of implementation should be spread out under all of the goals, or it would be only in one place, which is a standalone goal. That's a debate going on, and the assessment is that this debate may go over to next year, because till that time, the larger questions of financing for development would not be resolved. As a result, there's a likelihood that that would be kept with certain placeholders. So, in response to the very specific question, our desire to have a standalone goal, frankly, that's over. What we are trying to see is how, within means of implementation, with a certain intensity, can we cluster that so that it gets visible, and with certain interlinkages, and get some more flesh. And at the same time, under the sectoral ones, focus areas on poverty, economic growth, and so forth, can we try to get more, so that we can then say that focus area on means of implementation is also being complemented by the other sectoral goals. That is how the best possible scenario, perhaps, we are trying to push and secure till the game is over, let's say in one more year to go.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very useful. Ephraim,
yes,
any comments, observations, final?
Absolutely. Well, I would definitely say that we have a lot to do. There is a lot of work ahead of us. There is a lot that needs to be done on the government side, but as well on us. And first of all, I would need to say that government need to recognize that we are full citizens with full rights, but with full obligations. And we all, as citizens, we need to start working together. There is a challenge. We need to really land all these good proposals, all of these good practices. We need to find a way to try to replicate, at least in the structure itself, because every one of us comes from different contexts. So our challenge is to go back to our countries, to our homeland, and to try to sit with their governments, and to try to have a very serious and very direct and very frank conversation with them, and to really try to find ways to start finding a way to diminish poverty, and to start lowering the high salaries, and the low salaries begin to lift them. If we are able to do that, like to close that gap a little bit each year, for example, eventually migration is going to become more an option than a necessity as it is right now. So for now, I would say that I'm very happy of the results that this forum is already giving to us. And I'm looking forward to a very rich and sincere conversation tomorrow with governments from around the world, and of course with leaders from civil society all around the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The point you make about inequality is very topical. Piketty's just got his book on capital. People are suggesting he might win the Nobel Prize on economics on that. William.
No, let me start with to answer my sister who asked about conventions. And Peter, you responded to that. Taking the ILO fundamental conventions, the two conventions on migration, the Migrant Workers Convention, there are actually a whole lot of countries that have ratified. So there is a big number of countries that need to be held accountable for what they have ratified. And that's why it's not utopian. We have to hold them accountable to that. One of the interesting things that happened in the last 2 days, and in the session that I was moderating together with Sophie, it was very interesting. I'm not sure when was the last time government representatives attended the civil society days. And this year, for whatever reason, I noticed that there were government representatives in the civil society days. In the old days, we would say, this is a civil society forum, because the governments didn't want us to come into theirs, so we would say, this is our forum, and they don't get a voice. For whatever reason, we gave them a voice in our forum this year, because we didn't notice first that they were in the room.
Get the odd man out.
But what was interesting was that there was one example of in the recruitment workshop that we had, there was one example of in the US, some law that was passed and all, which looked progressive, which looked good for migrants. And it was nice that it was put on the table as a possible promising practice. It was interesting that somebody from civil society, from that corridor, US-Mexico corridor, said, these are the flaws in that you might want to look at. And this was constructive dialogue. And we can have more of that if we do it together. So my suggestion to the Swedes, to the Turkish government, Peter, if you could push this, is we came to the high-level dialogue saying 5 years, 8 points. Next year, and for the next 5 years, why don't we design the GFMD in a way that in every session of the GFMD, we have governments and civil society saying, we are working on this together. We are not yet there, but we are coming before you to put it before you to get ideas from you on how we can improve it and improve the gaps and strengthen the process in terms of protection. Can we work on a design like that? For which governments would be willing to do something like that? And let's have that discussion, just like we had it, and it was possible. It happened in our recruitment workshop yesterday. And that is why I heard one government representative saying, there was much of the same. What civil society has been saying, it's been saying for so many years, kind of thing. There's nothing new. There's nothing new because we are not getting your perspective in as governments. And maybe when those two perspectives mix, maybe it's like oil and water, right? But oil and water, but if you put oil and water in a glass and you put a matchstick to that, you get light. So why don't we try that, no? And to what Lizzie was saying a little while ago about the real voice of migrants, I think Lizzie coming here for some years, what we are actually saying is, in this global forum, more than ever before, there have been migrant voices. The number of registrations that has improved over the years, and there are more migrants in this civil society gathering than ever before. What is not happening, and what she was alluding to, is as we started on our first day and on our second day, we heard of deaths of migrant workers in the Mediterranean. And I come from a country where if you're fighting for justice and somebody dies in that struggle, we will not let that body be buried till our demands are not met. We should not have to do that. We should not have to bring the families of those who have lost people, migrants along borders. We should not have to bring them to this space for a change of heart. Constructive dialogue means you understand us, we understand you. We are different perspectives, yes, but there is a way forward. And we can take that way forward. And I suggest, if the Swedes, as you hand over this, why don't you make that appeal to the governments tomorrow and day after, that which government is willing to come to the next global forum to say, with civil society we are having this session, open session to discuss on how we are progressing. We have started, we have 5 years to go, 4 years to go. And in the 4 years, we will see change, but let's work at it. That is the way to go. At the national level, we will continue. because we'll be working at it at the national level, it will be great to showcase it at this level. But let's work on it so that others can learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. Kathy, you have the last word.
Thank you. And I do have a few things to say. So William talked a lot about the context within CSD, GFMD, and I want to take it outside because I think, you know, how do migrants contribute to development? And I think about the work that we need to do at national levels. In the United States, I think about the need to regularize over 12 million undocumented migrants who will have access to health care, who will have access to social protections, have a better chance at decent jobs and decent pay, who will have greater access to education. That is a contribution to development. And I think we have to make that link, and that's work that we need to do now, and it's work that will help to save lives. You mentioned every year, every international meeting that we go to, we're talking about migrant deaths.
Yes.
And it's not just and we know it's unnecessary. So we have to be about saving lives. The development goals that we're talking about are long-term, and we hope that the consequence of that will be a changed world in which people can move, if they choose to do so, in a safe way. If the countries of residence, they can live safely, equitably, in peace, and in their new homes, they can as well, but we know that's long-term. We have to be very conscientious about, you know, the immediate, the midterm, and the long-term. But certainly, regularization, calls for legalization of undocumented, that is a contribution to development. We have to make that link. The other thing I would say about institutions and having, you know, a greater relationship with, at the international level, with governments through the UN, I don't think we're prepared to do that either. So within the context of the last 2 days, I don't know how many times we've talked about the need to organize ourselves in other ways. And I know many of us have been frustrated that we only see each other at international events when there have been some resources to bring us together, and it's certainly not sufficient. And increasingly, we're seeing that the ways in which we're organized now are not building capacity, are not kind of giving us the leverage, are not giving us the deep thought capacity to strategize and move our agenda. And so we need to, on the one hand, continue, I think, to use these spaces to do that. But if we're going to be an effective force, and if we are indeed posing the question of having greater access to governments, we have to be much better organized than in the ways in which we are now. It's both a breadth as well as a deepness. One example is we just created 2 years ago the Women in Global Migration Working Group because nothing had existed that brought together that intersection of migration, women in a deep way and connected at this international level. There's so much more work that needs to be done. So while, you know, I am very appreciative of the space that we've been given, we also have to look beyond these spaces. But with regards to the Civil Society Days and GFMD, and some of us have been talking about this, we're looking at Turkey and Istanbul at the end of 2015. We can't wait until next summer to begin organizing ourselves towards that. So I hope before, you know, we conclude here as well that we make a commitment to really begin to give that some thought and begin to put together our own, you know, institutional coherence to be a more effective force with that, because we do not want to waste these opportunities. So the preparation for that should begin now.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Ladies and gentlemen, you would have noticed that it is past 5:15. It is 5:45, around that. If you don't mind, we pray for your indulgence for another 15 minutes for us to do the last final conclusion. Can I take this opportunity to thank our distinguished panel and to thank you for your constructive contribution, both in terms of questions and comments. Thank you very much. Now, for the panel, I would suggest there's some spare seats this side, if you were minded to walk down this way.
To the left.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, I'll quote you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you once again. We'll now go into the final closing ceremony. I'd first like to ask Cristina Velez, who would like to come up and make some practical announcements before we make our final statements.
All right, some last announcements as we prepare for our common space tomorrow. One thing is anyone who has exhibition materials, sorry, is it not? Sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Anyone with exhibition materials, it needs to be taken down tonight before you leave because chairs will be going all the way to the back tomorrow. They're expecting about 900 of us all together. And so it can go downstairs on the table right at the bottom of the stairs. After the coffee break tomorrow, they will put out okay. All right. Go ahead. Yep. Sorry. Okay. Ready? All right. Yes, now? Okay. Okay. So anyone with exhibition materials, it needs to be taken down tonight before you leave. They can be placed at the table at the bottom of the stairs. And then tomorrow, after the coffee break, the government will be putting out more tables down there so you can spread out a little bit. But for now, they just need to be placed in stacks so that we can fit it all together. And then after the coffee break, you can spread it out on more tables that they will put, again, downstairs. We also have some common space and government programs available downstairs. If you want them tonight, you can get them tomorrow morning. They will be there when you come through. But if you wanted to take a look at it tonight, we did print out about 100 copies. And now for tomorrow, it's very important that you bring your badge because there will be high security. The road will be blocked off. It will only be foot traffic and approved vehicles. So to get in onto the road, you need to show your badge. You also need to bring an ID just in case they want to check it. Then you'll go through metal detectors and regular security outside. They'll have a tent set up. So it's not like today. Okay, so please also get here early. 900 people, that's a lot of people to get through security. Okay? And lastly, anyone who is on financial assistance and hasn't turned in their receipts, please do that before you leave. And for the May GCM event after this, it's going to be in the room Riddarsalen, not Galleria like it says. Riddarsalen, which is upstairs, the room upstairs. And that's it. Great job.
Christina? Great. Thank you. Now I hand it over to Jibril, who will give some closing remarks.
Gosh, it's been a long 2 days. I think it was in the late 1960s that one of the deputies of Mao Zedong was asked, what did he think about the French Revolution? And his answer was, it's too early to tell. And I'm supposed to sort of form a view as to what happened here. It's far, far too early to tell. And the support I was supposed to give Michelle, poor Michelle, was some sort of guidance as to what should we say to government tomorrow. And we've had a very brilliant report from the rapporteurs, so the details we all know about it. So I'm beginning to think that it is less the practicals, but more the strategy of the things that would sort of make a difference, as it were. I have noticed in this last discussion, because many years ago, one of my managers told me that you know you are on top of running things well if you are only doing important things, not urgent things. If you find yourself doing urgent things, that means you're not on top of it. And I've realized that we've heard from the feedback, there's a lot of urgent things around. So we're not totally on top of this issue. There's lots of urgency and a lot of important things. So there's a bit more room where to go in terms of getting that sort of sweet point of balance. Third point I'd want to make, when we were briefing Sir Peter Sutherland earlier, he mentioned that one of the things he would talk about is, for example, using the ratification of the Domestic Workers Convention. And he used a phrase, he said, so that's the soft underbelly. It's a strategy. You look at the point of least resistance to enter. So I think that's the sort of guide to find this government's soft underbelly, as it were. It sounds quite dangerous, but we need to find it, and that might just help. The other thing is, in terms of getting this change, there is, beyond the arguments of what is important, what is urgent, what is needed, what is wanted, what is expected, there is the big difficulty of the power of continuity, the forces of continuity, the things that happen now. That currency and incumbency have power, and they have stickiness in them. And one has to sort of see how to reduce that bit of stickability, as it were, and that stickiness. My final observation is, and I made this point on Sunday when we had one of the side meetings, in terms of advocacy, trying to influence policymakers, because like many things, men played a big role in it for many years. They've kind of brought a masculine element to it, and we then pretend that advocacy is about intellect and logic, and it's about clever people working out big arguments to win a particular point. I so do not agree with that. I tend to ask people, I'd say, in your life, who are the most persuasive to you? Who are the ones who are able to make you change and do things? The answer is never my professor or my boss. It's always my partner, my wife, my mother, my sister, my brother. But one category, and that is true, but perhaps the one category of human beings who are the most successful in influencing change and advocacy are babies. And you know what with babies? They don't even bother to talk to us. They never, I haven't seen it yet, they never marshal a comprehensive argument to put to us as to why we should change. Yet every time they win. I want to know what they know that I don't know, so that I use it because they're winning. Innocence. Now, neurologists have been working on this and say, what is it that babies know that I don't know? Because I want to use it. And they're suggesting certain things, and I'll mention 2 or 3 of these things. One is simplicity. Apparently, I'm no neurosurgeon or neuroscientist, but apparently, our brains are wired to deal with simplicity. So what clever people need to do is they look at complex issues, let them reduce it to simple things for us. Then we advocate on it. So, Michelle, let it be simple. Simplicity. If you believe the scientists, simplicity works. Babies, they do simplicity. They tend to have two strategies. They scream or they smile. It's simple. It works. The second one is what's called perceived self-interest. The one you need to convince, it does not even have to be real. They just need to perceive that this is also in their interest. And babies, for some reason, have been able to convince parents that it is in the interest of the parent to feed the baby. Well, they're successful. So we perceive that it is in our interest as parents to feed the baby. So the baby is winning again. The other one is confidence. You know, now you know who my subject is, the one we're studying, it's babies. Are they confident or are they not confident? And the way you know it is this. Some of the few times that babies fail is when they're using one of their strategies, that is to cry. Yeah? So when they begin to, sometimes they don't know whether to cry or not to cry. So when you catch them in that moment of lack of confidence, when they don't know whether it's to cry or smile, you dismiss them. You ignore them. Because they're not serious on the matter. They lack confidence. But when they scream outrageously, they're confident on that matter, they get us. Finally, is empathy. The sort of to feel it almost from the side of the other. I've been hearing, and I think it is true, there's a lot of movement. I think Ephraim said it was from debate to dialogue to understanding to convergence. So there's a lot of genuine empathy between civil society of different colors and government of different colors. So if we can, it's a difficult one, but if we can find it to show that there's common interest, that we empathize, we know the difficulties they face, we might just perhaps be able to move a thing or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jibril. I'd also like to, first of all, thank you as the co-chair here for your vision and for your wisdom and for your chosen words and guiding us through these 2 days. And we must also be thinking on the same page, because I'd also like to start with quoting Ephraim and what he was also talking about, us as civil society. First, we were many years ago at tables sitting down, one across from one another. Then we were debating. Then we were having dialogue. Then we were understanding. And now we're having new forms of collaboration. And I think that this is a very interesting model for us to think of, because it also means that it takes some time. But what Ephraim also said, a man of many words as well, is that we are in a sense like an extended family. So this is where we also resonate. Some of us are new members of the family, and I look at the young baby sitting over there who has been, we've been hearing this baby for 2 days, and I think that it's a warm reminder of the importance of the issues that we're working on. So some are younger members, some are newer members to the family. Some of them are older and wiser. I would hope that I'm not one of them, and I think that there are many in the room here who are much older and wiser. Sometimes we talk a lot, sometimes we see each other, but like any family, we don't necessarily see each other all the time. But when we do come together, many times we also agree, because we are part of this extended family.
And I'd also like to invoke an image, as Jibril started in the opening with a physics lesson. I've also been thinking about my own studies, which were justice and peace studies. And the slogan that we had about 20 years ago when I was doing that undergraduate degree was think globally, act locally. How do you actually look at social justice on a macro scale and apply it locally? And I think that we've been looking for 2 days at least, and we will in the coming week and year, at a global process, which is the post-2015 process. We've also have an opportunity to influence the UN architecture. I think what Ana Lorena said about how do we actually see migration beyond the specific entities on migration, the Special Rapporteur, the UN Special Advisor on Migration to the Secretary General, but how do we look at the whole architecture, and how do we make sure that all the treaty bodies are looking at migration? And also the Global Forum on Migration and Development is obviously our global space now, and it will be for the coming day when we have our common space. But at the same time, we've heard a number of times we have to continue to advocate for this change at the local level. And we also have to bear in mind that for those of us who will go home tomorrow or Thursday or Friday, many of us will go home and deal with, once again, deaths of migrants because we work with them directly. We're dealing with their families. Negative public perception, something that we deal with all the time. Insecure working conditions, insecure resources. Some of us face targeting for the humanitarian assistance that we're providing for some of the most vulnerable. And some of us face threats to our own lives when we go back home and we do this work. We're on the front line, we're civil society, and because we are doing all of this, we are key partners. And I think that it was important what Peter Sutherland mentioned, that we are crucial to the debate. And I think it was Gregory Maniatis who said, if I remember correctly in the opening, that civil society has also been pioneers for some of the issues that are now on the global agenda. So as we are going now to have this agenda on the local level, we will also work with a wide range of actors to have these pressure points that was also mentioned here. And I think one of them that we need to increasingly look at and also discuss more how are some good practices are local and regional authorities, because we see that they are with us many times pressure points for the national level. The media was mentioned. There are a number of people in our midst here as civil society who are also from the media, who are shaping a new way of framing and also using language. Legal strategies done by lawyers and the courts, judges. I think this is also a group that many of us are increasingly working with. Professional groups, teachers associations. There's a number of unions here represented today representing teachers, but health professionals as well. And increasingly youth groups. This is also, I think, one emerging actor that we can also try to have more presence of in our discussions. So at the end of the day, what we will be doing when we do leave here is to continue this dialogue. This is a 2-day event, as has been said, as part of a bigger process that goes on every day, where we recreate this common space on a daily basis. And I think this is the challenge for all of us as we go home. How can we do this better? How can we be better equipped to do it? How can we have better resources and better support to do it? Because it's essential that we do it. And at the end of the day, how can we strive for more accountability? Whether it's upholding standards, whether it's implementing them, or whether it's simply to be accountable to have human dignity, I think is one of the main themes that has come up here. So I would like to now have a list of people that we would like and institutions to thank for their contributions in many ways to the Civil Society Days. The first is the government of Sweden, Eva Ackerman Borja, and the government team for hosting us.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank the donors, the European Commission, the Swiss, Dutch, Swedish, German, and Australian governments, the Banco Mer Foundation, ICMC, and also the Open Society Foundations and the MacArthur Foundation for their support last year. Thank you. many of us have felt very comfortable here. We'd like to thank the venue, the staff at the venue, the Brewery Conference Center, Martin and all the staff, especially for getting coffees when all the coffees were put away. They were very good. So thank you to the venue staff. The technical team, Marcelo and his team, for all the Madonna microphones, all the microphones. Language and communication is crucial for all of us to be able to speak to one another, so we should never forget to thank the interpreters who help us do that. Gracias y merci. The International Steering Committee. I would once again ask them to stand up so that we can acknowledge them. Thank you. All of the speakers, the moderators, and the rapporteurs for all of your work. The Swedish Red Cross, the Catholic Diocese of Stockholm, and Caritas Sweden and for hosting the reception last night, and particularly George Joseph of Caritas Sweden and his team. And all of the volunteers from Caritas Sweden. The organizers of the Civil Society Days, the ICMC team, John Beenham, Wies Maas, Christina Velez, Sophie van Hassen, Sophie Ngodiep, Leila Marzo, Justina Haruana, and Bjorn Remmerswal. Thank you very much. And of course, the last round of thanks is to ourselves. To ourselves for this whole process, for our commitment and our dedication. Thank you.
And can I just say, can we please hear it for Michelle, our wonderful chair for 2014.
And co-chair. Thank you.
For her calm, collected, and sensible approach to the whole deliberations. Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Michelle.
Thank you.
And that was to be my job to thank the chair and co-chair. So I won't do much other than to comment on the poetry of this team. Sometimes in the life of struggle and success, certainly when we start conferences and spend all our work worrying about success and struggle in our own lives as migrants and those on boats and deserts, sometimes the only way to understand it is in poetry. So from a Swedish poet, we'll close this 2014 Global Forum Civil Society Days with a short poem from Thomas Tranströmer, a Swedish poet. The name of the poem is A Man from Benin, and it goes like this. When darkness fell, I was still, but my shadow pounded against the drumskin of hopelessness. When the pounding began to ease, I saw the image of a man coming forward in the emptiness, a page lying open, like going past a house long since abandoned, and someone appears at the window, a stranger. He held his right arm bent. It was thin, like a child's. He was a kind of ambassador, interrupted in the middle of a speech, which the silence continues even more forcibly. 3 peoples were silent in him. The drifting and the waiting ones, the hunched up flock. Long in his eyes quarantine, reborn were the words. I am come to meet him who raises his lantern to see himself in me. Let's take this work home. Let's take this work home. Amen.
Thank you very much.